Hi, I'm Kang, and I'm getting into the fighting game genre. I know there's some great games out there, but I want to play the best.
Street Fighter 2 is number 3 on this list, Street Fighter 2 is number 4 on this list, Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection is number 1 on this list, which features Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 is on this list twice.
Okay, so Street Fighter 2 is a fairly popular game. I guess we could start with that one, but in order to do that, I gotta see which console to buy it on. How am I supposed to afford all this when I'm $872,000 in debt?
Street Fighter 2, a game that every fighting game fan has played before, and if you haven't, don't worry, Capcom's got you covered. Originally releasing on arcades in 1991 and then on consoles in 1992, Street Fighter 2 was an instant success.
I mean, Capcom made damn sure it would be a success with the amount of systems it was released on.
It released on the SNES.
Okay, the SNES, that makes sense.
And the Amiga, and the Atari ST, and the Commodore 64, and the Amstrad CPC, and the ZX Spectrum, and finally on PC.
Oh, thank goodness. I was worried that that one guy on the Amiga wouldn't be able to play Street Fighter 2.
With Street Fighter 2 being such a commercial success, Capcom capitalized by bringing it to an even wider audience and re-releasing it on the CPS Changer.
The what?
Apparently, the CPS Changer was Capcom's one and only attempt at making a console. It was a Japanese exclusive and a massive failure. A year later, Capcom wised up and re-released Street Fighter on a more successful system. Sure, they had re-released it on a lot of systems in '92, but there was still some notable consoles missing. I mean, the game still wasn't out on Sega Genesis, which was a fighting game machine. Just look at all these buttons on the controller. Think of all the combos you could do. But instead, they decided to re-release it on the Game Boy.
The Game Boy?
Yeah, I don't know why this exists either. The Game Boy could run Super Mario Land and barely at that, so they decided to release a whole fighting game on it. A fighting game with complex button combinations. Meanwhile, the Game Boy had 2 face buttons. And on top of that, the game looked like this.
Let's just move on. Maybe Capcom will release it on something that actually makes sense.
Then in 1997, the game released on the Sega Master System.
Why?
Yeah, that's right. Instead of releasing on the Sega Genesis, which once again was the fighting game machine, they released it on the Sega Master System, which at this point was over a decade old, had an 8-bit processor in 1997, and probably only had one person still consistently playing on it, and that one person probably looked like this. Then a year later, in 1998, they released it on the Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1. These 2 re-releases actually make sense. Unlike releasing it on a handheld that could barely run it, or a console that had died a decade ago, the PS1 was the most popular system ever at the time, so yeah, releasing on that was a no-brainer. And the Sega Saturn was dead on arrival, but yeah, releasing on that too, I guess, why not? It'll be funnier than the Genesis. After 1998, Capcom didn't release Street Fighter for 6 years.
My god, the world must have been really fucking bored for 6 years straight.
That was until 2004 when the original Street Fighter 2 finally made its triumphant return to gaming on mobile.
I quit.
Now, if you're wondering why I quit, because games coming out on mobile happen fairly often nowadays, well, that's because this happened in 2004. And back in 2004, phones didn't look like this, they looked like this.
That's right, Capcom released Street Fighter 2 on a flip phone. A fucking flip phone!
And what's even more confusing is that they released it on that, but they never released it on an actual smartphone. Street Fighter 2 would be re-released 2 more times on actual normal systems. The first re-release was in 2006 on the PS2, OG, Xbox, and PSP in collections. Then it was re-released one last time on the PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch.
That was 3 years ago, by the way, and if you think that games like GTA 5 and Skyrim get re-released a lot today, well then just remember that Street Fighter 2 is 30 years old and still gets re-released. In fact, Street Fighter 2 has been re-released on
arcades, SNES, Amiga, Atari ST, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, PC, CPS Changer, Game Boy, Sega Master System, Sega Saturn, PS1, Mobile, PS2, OG Xbox, PSP, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and finally Windows.
But I haven't even talked about all the different versions of Street Fighter 2 that have been released on all the different systems.
Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior. That was the original version of Street Fighter 2 that released on everything under the sun except the Genesis. Then in 1992, Street Fighter Champion Edition came out with 4 bosses from the original game becoming playable characters. This version of Street Fighter 2 actually came out on the Genesis.
Holy shit!
Then 8 months later, Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting came out, making the game faster. 1 year later in '93, Super Street Fighter came out. This is the version that came out on the CPS Changer, The Failure, and this was basically a remake of the original game that came out 2 years ago. It had new graphics, animations, audio, and removed the faster gameplay of Hyper Fighting and used the slower gameplay of the originals, a change which people were not happy with. In response to this, a whole new game came out called Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I wish I was joking. This version added new mechanics like super combos and the ability to juggle, and brought back the faster gameplay.
Just make a new game at that point. Oh shit, they did.
But that didn't spell the death of Street Fighter 2, because in 2003 the Anniversary Edition came out. And as we all know, in 2004, the game came out on mobile. Then the games got an HD remake, not this one, not this one, not this one, not this one, but this one. And finally, the last version of Street Fighter 2 came out in 2017, Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Challengers, adding Evil Ryu and Violent Ken.
And with that, the Street Fighter 2 saga is complete. Until they get released on PS5 and Series X.